This video features the installation of our spring-centered street kit with our streetlight flywheel. However, kits are available in different configurations based on the torque being produced at the crankshaft and your style of driving. The installation procedure will be the same, except for the disc being used. The ACT kits for this application are single mass conversion kits, which include a flywheel, and the individual components are not compatible with the OEM clutch or flywheel. For a complete list of kits and their full details and specifications, please see the description below. These kits fit a variety of Honda Civic models that are not listed in this video. Please see our website for a complete application listing. While this video provides the basics on how to replace a clutch and flywheel, it is in no way intended to replace a factory service manual. Begin by disconnecting the negative cable from the battery. Move it away from the post to assure it will not make accidental contact. Unfasten and remove the splash guards located under the engine and transmission. Unbolt and remove the front wheel and tire assemblies. Starting on the driver's side of the vehicle, using a screwdriver or something similar, pry up the stake on the axle nut, then unfasten and remove the axle nut. Repeat this on the passenger side. Remove the drain plug located at the lower rear of the transmission and drain the transmission fluid. Reinstall the plug using a new washer and tighten it to 32 foot-pounds. Starting on the driver's side, unfasten the flange nuts and disconnect the lower ball joint from the lower control arm. Remove the axle from the knuckle assembly and then remove the axle from the transmission. On the passenger side, unfasten the flange nuts and disconnect the lower ball joint from the lower control arm. Unbolt the bracket securing the axle to the engine. Remove the axle from the knuckle assembly and then remove the axle from the transmission. Remove the battery and battery box from the vehicle. Unbolt the air filter housing. Disconnect the sensor and free the wiring from the air filter housing. Loosen the clamp for the air intake tube and then remove the air intake tube from the plastic intake assembly. Remove the filter housing from the vehicle. Unfasten the slave cylinder and unbolt the hydraulic line bracket. Unplug the electrical connectors located at the front of the transmission. Unbolt the bracket for the uppermost sensor located toward the top of the transmission. Unfasten the ground strap. Unplug the other electrical connectors located toward the top of the transmission and free the wiring harnesses from the brackets. At the rear of the transmission, unfasten the harness bracket from the transmission. Unbolt the shifter cable bracket from the transmission. Remove the retainer clips and pull the shift cables from the transmission shift levers, and then move the cables and bracket assembly out of the way. Unplug the electrical connector at the top rear of the transmission. Install an appropriate engine support hanger and brace the engine in position. Unbolt and remove the air intake resonator. Unfasten and remove the lower mount. On the driver's side, remove the steering tie rod and ball joint, lock pin, and nut. Then remove the ball joint from the knuckle assembly. Repeat this on the passenger side. Inside the vehicle, remove the access panel behind the brake pedal. Unbolt the steering joint and remove it from the pinion shaft. Remove the hardware from both left and right front subframe rear stays. Support the front subframe up into position. Unfasten the subframe mounting bolts. Disconnect the electrical connector for the steering rack. Slowly lower the front subframe, making sure no wires or other parts are damaged. Unfasten both left and right sway bar end links. Continue to lower the front subframe and remove it from under the vehicle. Disconnect the starter wiring and unbolt the starter. Unfasten the upper bell housing bolts. Place the support under the transmission. Unbolt and remove the upper transmission mount. Unfasten and remove the inspection cover. Unfasten the lower bell housing bolts and remove the transmission from the vehicle. Unbolt and remove the old pressure plate and disc. Unbolt and remove the old flywheel. Remove the rubber dust boot and then remove the bearing and shift fork. Clean the guide tube, pivot ball, and fork. Lightly coat the guide tube with Ceram Lube. Lightly coat the disc splines with the purple Ceram Lube included with your kit. Slide the disc onto the input shaft and work the lube into the splines. Remove the disc and wipe off any excess lube to prevent contamination of your new clutch. Place a small amount of lube on the bearing pivot surfaces. Place a small amount of lube on the fork pivot surfaces. Install the spring wire into the fork and then place the bearing into position onto the fork. Install the release fork and bearing assembly into position, making sure the spring clip snaps onto the pivot ball. Check the fork and bearing assembly for proper operation. Place the rubber dust boot back into position. Clean the flywheel and pressure plate friction surfaces with a non-petroleum based cleaner. Install the flywheel onto the crankshaft. We do recommend using some sort of thread locking compound on the bolts. Install the bolts and tighten them in a star pattern until snug. Then torque the bolts to 88 foot-pounds, also in a star pattern. Set the disc in position, making sure the directional marking is facing in the right way, and use the alignment tool to hold it in place. Place the pressure plate in position and install the bolts. Tighten the bolts equally in a star pattern until the pressure plate is snug. And then remove the alignment tool. Torque the pressure plate bolts to 25 foot-pounds, also in a star pattern. Lift the transmission back into position and engage it to the back of the engine. Install all the bell housing bolts and tighten the ones on the engine side to 48 foot-pounds and the ones on the transmission side to 47 foot-pounds, including the starter bolts. Install the upper transmission mount and torque the nuts to 58 foot-pounds and the bolts to 40 foot-pounds. Remove the engine support hanger. At the rear of the transmission, install the harness bracket. Reinstall the starter wiring. Install the shifter cable bracket and tighten the hardware. Install the inspection cover and tighten the hardware. Lift the front subframe back into position. Loosely install the subframe mounting bolts and then the subframe rear stay mounting bolts. Insert a subframe alignment pin through the positioning hole on the right rear subframe and into the positioning hole on the body. Then loosely tighten the subframe right rear mounting bolt. Repeat this on the left rear of the subframe. Torque the subframe mounting bolts to 76 foot-pounds. Torque the subframe rear stay horizontal bolts to 69 foot-pounds. Install and tighten any additional subframe hardware. Reconnect the plugs for the steering rack. Reconnect the sensor at the rear of the transmission. Install the lower mount and install the hardware. Torque the hardware to 69 foot-pounds. Install both left and right sway bar end links and tighten the bolts to 47 foot-pounds. On the driver's side, install the axle into the transmission, then into the knuckle assembly. Install the lower ball joint into the lower control arm. Install the hardware and torque them to 47 foot-pounds. Install the steering tie rod and ball joint into the knuckle assembly. Tighten the hardware to 58 to 65 foot-pounds. Insert a lock pin. Install the axle nut and tighten it to 181 foot-pounds. Stake the nut with a punch or something similar. On the passenger side, install the axle into the transmission, then into the knuckle assembly. Install and tighten the hardware for the brackets securing the axle to the engine. Install the lower ball joint into the lower control arm. Install the hardware and torque them to 47 foot-pounds. Install the axle nut and tighten it to 181 foot-pounds. Stake the nut with a punch or something similar. Install the steering tie rod and ball joint into the knuckle assembly. Tighten the hardware to 58 to 65 foot-pounds. Insert a lock pin. Install the slave cylinder back into position and tighten the hardware to 16 foot-pounds. Secure the hydraulic line bracket and tighten the bolt. Install the shifter cables and secure them with the retainer clips. Remove the filler plug and fill the transmission with the vehicle manufacturer's recommended fluid and amount. Tighten the filler plug to 32 foot-pounds. Install the ground strap at the front of the transmission. Install the bracket for the uppermost sensor located toward the top of the transmission. Reconnect the electrical connectors located toward the front of the transmission and install the wiring harnesses back into the brackets. Install the air intake resonator. Install the filter housing and tighten the hardware. Install the air intake tube onto the plastic intake assembly and secure the clamp. Reconnect the sensor and secure the wiring to the air filter housing. Install the battery and the battery box and secure them. Install the front wheel and tire assemblies and torque the lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. Install the splash guards located under the engine and transmission. Reconnect the battery cables and tighten the hardware. Inside the vehicle, install the steering joint onto the pinion and tighten the bolt to 21 foot-pounds. Install the access panel behind the brake pedal. Support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching.